Here's a quick snippet from my podcast, Maximize Your Influence. Hope you enjoy. Subscribe at MaximizeYourInfluence.com. So for our geeky article, let's get into the ninja this week. Ninja go! So again, I mentioned with the article, it's the little things we don't think about. The 5% here, the 2% here, the 6% here. Every time we add a tool of persuasion, or understand a smell or a color or spatial relationships or a culture, we become better at influence. Remember, we want to persuade people how they want to be persuaded. So this will be a controversial ninja going to Bill Belichick of the Patriots. We're in the middle of the football playoffs. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Bill Belichick or the Patriots, but there's no doubt he's one of the best coaches out there, and they're one of the best teams. And for the last game, he put a temperature gauge or a thermometer outside the tunnel in Gillette Stadium. They're playing the Chargers. It's going to be out 60 degrees in California where they play, but there at game time it was expected to be 25 degrees. So just as they came out, just a subtle reminder, big, huge temperature gauge that said 25 degrees. I love it. And some people think, well, it didn't matter. And all the players will say it doesn't have any effect. But does it? Isn't that interesting? The little subtle things. Maybe it gave a little percent advantage. Maybe it did affect people. We don't know. That's a difficult one to gauge. But one in football that's really interesting that we talk about, just the little things, the psychological tricks, is icing the kicker. Now, for those who don't know American football, this is when they kick a field goal at the end of the game for the win. Let's say the game's really close and there's 2 seconds left, and this one field goal is going to win the game. And so what happens is the opposing coach calls a timeout right before they kick it, with the thought being it's icing the kicker. They're going to think about it and maybe freak themselves out or think themselves out or plant a little seed of doubt. So does that even work? That little thing. So I did a little research, and here are the interesting numbers. So in a regular season game, people hit field goals 81% of the time when there was no timeout called. But when there was a timeout called just right before the snap, remember icing the kicker, 76% of the time it worked. So there was a 5% difference between icing and not icing the kicker, between that timeout and not calling a timeout. Interesting, that little percent, 5%, that little psychological game. Now, where it got really interesting, if this was an overtime, I mean, the game has gone really long, and this was the kick that was going to win the game, when they were not iced, or there was no timeout called, 87% of the time, they made it. But when the timeout was called and they were iced, it was only 69% of the field goal kickers made it. That's 18% difference. So you got to look at the numbers. You got to look at your ability to influence. It's the little things that sometimes we think now don't matter. It could be the way you dress, the way you smell, the way you present, the way you speak, your tone of voice, your accent, your volume. All these things matter. And they might only matter 2% here, 1% here, 4% here. But you start adding those up, now all of a sudden 20, 30, 40, or 50%. You become 50% better as a persuader. And similar to that, talked about it a few years on the show, the Arizona Wildcats college football team in the visiting locker room. So this is college football. And if you know anything about Arizona, this is for people around the world, very hot. It can get to 100 degrees, 110 degrees, 120 degrees. It's a very hot place. So inside the visiting locker room of the Arizona Wildcat is a sign that says, and they see this right before they get onto the football field. I mean, big red letters, warning extreme heat. And I'll put a link so you can see this. It says today's temperature has reached 98 degrees. The temperature in the field has reached 131 degrees. Heat-related symptoms include, but are not limited to, dizziness, fatigue, rapid heart rate, excessive sweating, nausea, vomiting. Right? Stay hydrated. Seek medical attention as on the sign they see before they get out. It'd be very similar to being electrocuted with the big exclamation points in yellow. It's just this huge sign. Now, some might say, oh, well, it's important. They need to stay hydrated. They're looking out for their best interests. And I'm just going to say, maybe, but I don't think so. It's just one of those little subtle things to plant a seed that most people say, oh, it doesn't make a difference, but I'm sure it does. If you're watching us on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment, Share it with your friends. Let us know what other tools you want to hear. Persuade with power.